The moment the heavy oak doors of courtroom 402 swung open, my daughter Veronica covered her mouth to hide a giggle, and my son-in-law Derek shook his head with open contempt. I was wearing my old gardening clothes, muddy Red Wing boots that had seen better days, and a flannel shirt with a fraying collar, while holding my stained canvas hat in my rough hands. To them I looked like a lost farmer, a confused old man who had wandered into the Hall of Justice by mistake. I saw Veronica lean over and whisper something to Derek, and he smirked with that arrogance that had always defined him, checking his $3,000 watch, as if my presence was wasting his precious time. I heard her choked laugh, a sound that cut through my chest like a serrated knife. To them I was an embarrassment, an inconvenience, a senile old fool who had no business being there. But then the judge looked up. His eyes met mine across the room. I watched as the color drained from his face, as his hand trembled on the wooden gavel. His lips moved, and he whispered something that silenced the entire courtroom. "My God, it is really him." Everyone turned to look at me. The silence became so thick I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears. Veronica stopped smiling. Derek frowned, confused, staring at the judge as if he had lost his mind. They had no idea who I truly was. Not until that very moment. Because to them I was just Gus, the old man who lived in a little farmhouse on the edge of town, the man they had ignored for years, the obstacle they now wanted to declare incompetent, so they could take everything I had built. But what they did not know was that this courtroom had been my hunting ground for 35 years, that every corner of this building held my secrets, and that the man sitting behind that bench owed me his entire career. If you have ever felt that your own family cast you aside, that they treated you as if you were invisible, as if everything you had sacrificed for them was worthless, then you know exactly how I felt that morning. Let me take you back to the moment I walked through those doors just 2 minutes earlier. It was 8:55 in the morning on a Tuesday. The air in the hallway smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. My boots squeaked against the polished marble floor, leaving faint trails of dried mud with every step. I did it on purpose. I wanted them to see the dirt. I wanted them to see the poverty they thought I lived in. I walked down the center aisle, my back slightly hunched, not from age but from the weight of the betrayal I was carrying. On the left side of the room sat my daughter Veronica. She was wearing a cream-colored designer suit that probably cost more than my truck. Her hair was perfectly styled, and her makeup was flawless, covering any trace of the little girl I used to carry on my shoulders. When she saw me, she didn't wave. She didn't smile with warmth. She just let out that little cruel laugh. It was a laugh of disbelief. She turned to her husband, and I could read her lips perfectly. Can you believe he wore that? Next to her sat Derek Vance, my son-in-law. He was busy typing something on his phone, probably checking the odds on a sports bet or texting one of his mistresses. He looked up for a fraction of a second, saw my flannel shirt, and rolled his eyes. He reached out and brushed an invisible speck of dust off the lapel of his Armani suit. That gesture told me everything. In his mind, I was already dust. I was already gone. He was just waiting for the judge to sign the papers so he could sweep me into the trash bin of history. I walked to the defendant's table and sat down alone. I didn't hire a lawyer. I didn't need one. The chair creaked under my weight. I placed my old canvas hat on the table in front of me. It was stained with oil and soil, the badge of a man who works with his hands. Across the aisle, Derek's lawyer, a man named Thorne, who looked like a shark in a cheap suit, leaned over to them. I could hear his whisper clearly in the quiet room. "Do not worry, folks. This will be over in 10 minutes. The old man does not even have representation. He is visibly disoriented. Look at how he is dressed. We will have that power of attorney signed before lunch." I stared straight ahead at the empty judge's bench. I did not feel shame for my clothes. I felt a deep burning shame for my failure as a father. I had raised Veronica to value character, but somewhere along the way she had started valuing price tags instead. I had let a wolf like Derek into the sheepfold, and now he was trying to eat the shepherd. I felt a vibration in my pocket. It was my old flip phone. I ignored it. I knew it was probably a notification from the bank reminding me that my accounts were still frozen thanks to the court order my own children had filed. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed, his voice bouncing off the high ceiling. The door behind the bench opened, and Judge Harold Harry Finch walked in. He was a stern man known for his zero-tolerance policy on courtroom theatrics. He moved with the heavy grace of a man who has heard every lie ever told. He sat down and adjusted his robe. He didn't look at the gallery. He just opened the file in front of him. "Docket number 457, he read in a monotone voice. "Petition for full guardianship over Augustus Sterling due to mental incapacitation and early onset dementia. Plaintiffs, Veronica Sterling and Derek Vance. Defendant, Augustus Sterling, acting pro se." He paused to adjust his reading glasses. He picked up a pen ready to make a note. Then he looked up. He looked at the plaintiff's table first. He nodded at the shark lawyer. Then his gaze drifted to the defendant's table. To me. That was the moment time stopped. I saw the blood drain from his face instantly. It was as if he had been slapped by a ghost. His hand, the one holding the expensive fountain pen, started to shake. The pen slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the desk, rolling across the mahogany wood. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. Harry Finch stared at me. He stared at the flannel shirt. He stared at the muddy boots. And then he stared into my eyes. Those same eyes that had stared him down 30 years ago when he was just a terrified intern caught in a moral dilemma that almost destroyed his life. He knew these eyes. He knew the man behind the disguise. "My God," he whispered again, his voice trembling so much the court reporter stopped typing. Is that really him?" The shark lawyer stood up, looking confused. "Your Honor, is something wrong?" Harry didn't answer him. He stood up abruptly, knocking his heavy leather chair backward. It hit the wall with a loud thud. He leaned over the bench, ignoring judicial protocol, ignoring the confused murmurs from the gallery. "Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice cracking. "Gus." Veronica's smile vanished. She looked from the judge to me and back again, panic starting to flicker in her eyes. Derek stopped checking his watch. He sat up straight, sensing the sudden shift in atmospheric pressure. Why was the judge calling the crazy old man by his nickname? I didn't stand up. I just leaned back in my chair and crossed my arms over my chest. I looked Harry right in the eye, and I raised a single finger to my lips. A gesture for silence. A command. Harry froze. He understood immediately. He sat back down slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. He took a deep breath, trying to compose himself, but I could see the sweat forming on his forehead. He picked up his pen with shaking fingers. "This hearing is now in session," he announced, but his voice lacked its usual authority. It sounded terrified. Derek leaned over to his lawyer and hissed loud enough for me to hear. "What the hell is going on? Why does he look like he has seen a monster?" I smiled internally. "Oh, Derek, he has not seen a monster. He has seen the silencer. And you are about to find out exactly why they used to call me that." But before the gavel could come down, before the first lie could be told by my ungrateful daughter, my mind drifted back. I needed to remember how we got here. I needed to remember the exact moment the trap was set. It wasn't today. It wasn't in this courtroom. It started exactly 3 months ago on a rainy Saturday night at a dinner that was supposed to be a celebration, but turned into an execution. The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. The smell of rain. The taste of expensive champagne that tasted like vinegar. The look in Veronica's eyes when she handed me the envelope. 3 months ago, I was just Gus the retiree. I drove my 1995 Ford pickup truck 2 hours through a storm to get to their estate in the gated community of Oakwood Hills. It was my 70th birthday. Veronica had called me a week before, her voice sweet like honey, asking me to come over for a small family dinner. "Just us, Daddy," she had said. "No fuss, just family." I should have known better. I should have heard the false note in her voice. But a father wants to believe his child loves him. So I put on my best Sunday shirt, polished my boots, and wrapped up the only thing of value I had left to give the antique gold pocket watch that had belonged to my grandfather. I wanted to give it to Derek as a peace offering, a sign that I accepted him as the head of the family. I parked my truck between Derek's Mercedes and Veronica's Range Rover. My old truck looked like a rust bucket sitting next to spaceships. I took a deep breath, grabbed the small gift box, and walked to the front door. I didn't know it then, but I wasn't walking into a birthday party. I was walking into an ambush. And the man who walked out of that house later that night would not be the same man who walked in. The old Gus was about to die, and Augustus Sterling, the legend of Wall Street, was about to be reborn from the ashes of a father's broken heart. The rain that night was relentless, beating against the cracked windshield of my 1995 Ford F-150 like 1,000 tiny hammers trying to break in. I remember gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white not from the difficulty of driving, but from the sheer anxiety of what lay ahead. It was a 2-hour drive from my small farmhouse on the outskirts of town to the gated community of Oakwood Hills, where my daughter Veronica lived with her husband Derek. The guard at the security booth looked at my rusted truck with open suspicion, taking his sweet time to verify my name on the guest list, even though I had been there a dozen times before. I didn't blame him. In a neighborhood where Bentleys and Teslas were as common as mailboxes, my old workhorse looked like an intruder. I reached into my breast pocket and patted the small velvet box sitting there. Inside was my grandfather's antique pocket watch, solid gold, with an inscription on the back that read, "Time waits for no man, but honor endures forever." It was the most valuable thing I owned, not in terms of money, but in terms of soul. I had brought it as a peace offering for Derek. I knew he looked down on me. I knew he thought I was just a simple old man playing in the dirt. But I hoped that giving him this heirloom would bridge the gap between us. I wanted to show him that I accepted him as the protector of my daughter. I wanted to believe that we could be a family. I parked the truck far away from the front entrance, so I wouldn't drip oil on their pristine cobblestone driveway. I took a deep breath, grabbed the gift, and ran through the rain to the massive double doors. Veronica opened them before I could knock. She didn't hug me. She looked down at my feet immediately. "Daddy, please take off those boots outside," she said, her voice tight. "We just had the white marble in the foyer polished, and I do not want mud everywhere." That was my hello. "Happy 70th birthday, Gus. Now take off your boots and do not ruin my floor." I did as I was told, leaving my boots on the porch and stepping inside in my socks. The house was magnificent and cold. It felt less like a home and more like a museum where you were afraid to touch anything. The air conditioning was set so low it made the hair on my arms stand up. Derek was in the living room pouring himself a glass of amber liquid that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. He didn't offer me any. "Well, look who made it," he said, flashing that shark-like smile that never reached his eyes. "The country mouse comes to the city." "Happy birthday, Gus. You made good time for driving a heap of scrap metal." I forced a smile and handed Veronica a bottle of wine I had brought. It wasn't expensive, but it was a good vintage from a local vineyard I trusted. She looked at the label with a faint sneer and set it on a side table where it would likely stay until they threw it out. "Let us eat," she said. "The caterers are waiting." Dinner was a display of wealth without warmth. We sat at a dining table long enough to land a plane on eating tiny portions of food I couldn't pronounce. Derek spent the entire meal talking about himself. He was a developer, or so he claimed. He launched into a monologue about his latest project, Vance Heights. "It is going to be revolutionary, Gus," he said, waving his fork around. "Luxury eco-living. We are talking smart homes, solar roadways, the works. I have investors lining up around the block. We are breaking ground next month. I listened quietly, nodding at the right times, but my mind was working differently. I was retired now, but you do not spend 40 years as a forensic auditor without developing a sixth sense for bullshit. I knew the land he was talking about. I had audited a company that tried to build there in the 80s. That land was a geological nightmare, a sinkhole waiting to happen. No bank in their right mind would finance a project there unless the surveys were falsified. But I didn't say anything. I just ate my cold soup and watched my daughter look at him with adoration that seemed almost desperate. Then came the cake, a small, tasteful thing from a bakery that charged by the millimeter. They didn't sing. Derek just clapped his hands once like a ringmaster signaling the main event. "Before you cut the cake, Gus, we have a surprise for you," Derek said, reaching under his chair. He pulled out a thick blue folder and slid it across the polished mahogany table. It stopped right in front of my plate. "What is this?" I asked, my hand hovering over the cover. "Open it," Veronica said, her voice trembling slightly. "It is for you, Daddy. It is for your peace of mind." I opened the folder. Inside there were no birthday cards, no photos of the grandkids I never got to see. It was a legal document. Durable power of attorney, asset management agreement, guardianship petition. I read the first paragraph and felt the blood drain from my face. These papers would give Derek and Veronica full control over my finances, my medical decisions, and my property. It would legally declare me incapable of managing my own affairs. "What is this supposed to be?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Derek leaned forward, clasping his hands. "Look, Gus, we are worried about you. You are 70 years old. You are living out there in the middle of nowhere all alone. It is dangerous. Dangerous," I repeated. "I grow tomatoes, Derek. I read books. What is dangerous about that?" "Your memory." "Daddy," Veronica chimed in, tears welling up in her eyes. "It is getting worse. Just last week you left the main gate to the farm wide open. The neighbors' cows got in and trampled the garden. And remember when you visited us last month? You left the gas stove on. We could have all died." I stared at her. My mind, which Derek thought was failing, sharpened instantly into a razor blade. I remembered those incidents perfectly. I remembered closing that gate and hearing the latch click. I remembered checking it twice because that is what I do. And the stove. I had wiped it down after cooking breakfast, and the dials were all in the off position. I looked at Derek. He was watching me with a predatory calmness. And then it clicked. The pieces fell into place like the tumblers of a safe. He had walked me to the gate that day. He had been the last one in the kitchen. He had staged it. He had gaslit my own daughter into thinking her father was losing his mind. I closed the folder slowly. "I am not signing this," I said, my voice steady. Derek's smile vanished. "Gus, do not be difficult. This is for your own good. We just want to protect you. That land of yours is too much work. We can sell it, put you in a nice assisted living facility here in the city close to us. You would be safe." "Safe?" I asked, looking him dead in the eye. "Or profitable?" "I checked the county records, Derek. I know the Highway Commission is planning a new exit ramp that cuts right through the edge of my property. That land isn't just dirt anymore. It is a gold mine. Is that why you need the power of attorney? To sell it before I figure out what it is worth?" The silence in the room was absolute. Veronica looked shocked. She didn't know. He hadn't told her. Derek's face turned a shade of red I had never seen before. The vein in his neck started to throb. "You ungrateful old bat!" he hissed, slamming his fist on the table. "We are trying to help you. You are going to rot out there, and when you do, the state will take everything. We are offering you a lifeboat." I stood up. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the velvet box. I had been so foolish. I had actually thought I could buy his respect with a watch. "I brought this for you," I said, placing the box on the table. "It belonged to my grandfather. He was a man of honor. I thought maybe if you carried it, some of that honor might rub off on you. But I see now that I was wrong." Derek snatched the box. He didn't even open it. He didn't look at the gold engraving. He stood up, walked over to the gas fireplace that was crackling in the corner, and tossed the box into the flames. "I do not need your trash, Gus," he spat. "And I do not need your permission. You are going to sign those papers one way or another. If you do not do it willingly, we will have the court do it for you. We will find a doctor who says what we need him to say. We will take everything, and you will die in a state-run nursing home wondering why you didn't just take the deal." I watched the velvet box catch fire. I watched the legacy of a good man burn because of the greed of a small one. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I simply turned to Veronica. She was crying silently, looking down at her lap, unable to meet my gaze. She was weak. She had chosen him over me a long time ago. "Goodbye, Veronica," I said softly. I walked out of that mausoleum of a house into the pouring rain. I didn't put my boots back on. I walked in my socks through the mud, letting the cold water soak into my skin. I needed to feel the cold. I needed to freeze the pain in my heart so I could do what needed to be done. I climbed into my truck and started the engine. As I drove away, I didn't look back at the mansion. I looked at the road ahead. Derek had declared war. He thought he was fighting a senile old farmer. He had no idea he had just awakened the silencer. And as the lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the dark road, I made a promise to myself. I would not just defeat him. I would dismantle him piece by piece until there was nothing left but the truth. The sun rose the next morning with a deceptive beauty that mocked the storm of the previous night. The sky was a piercing blue, and the air smelled of wet earth and pine needles. I woke up in my farmhouse feeling the ache in my bones, not from age, but from the damp chill of the rain I had walked through. I made my coffee black and strong, just the way Martha used to hate it. I sat on the porch for 10 minutes, watching the cardinals flit between the oak trees, trying to center myself. I knew Derek and Veronica would not wait long to make their move, but I underestimated just how fast a desperate man with gambling debts could run. I climbed into my truck and drove into town. My first stop was the First National Bank on Main Street. It was a small branch, the kind with marble counters and tellers who knew your dog's name. I needed $500. It was planting season, and I had ordered a special batch of heirloom tomato seeds from a supplier in Italy. It was a small luxury, a hobby that kept my hands busy and my mind sharp. I walked up to the counter and smiled at Brenda, a woman I had known since she was in pigtails. "Good morning, Brenda," I said, sliding my debit card across the counter. "Just a withdrawal today. $500 for the farm." Brenda didn't smile back. She looked at the computer screen and her face went pale. She typed something, frowned, and typed again. She avoided my eyes, staring intently at the monitor, as if hoping the numbers would change. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I am so sorry. The system, it is not letting me process this." I felt a cold prickle at the base of my neck. "What do you mean, Brenda? Is the machine down?" She shook her head and leaned in closer, lowering her voice so the other customers wouldn't hear. "It is not the machine, Gus. Your account has been flagged. It is frozen. Status code 99. That means pending investigation into competency." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Competency. They hadn't just filed a petition. They had used an emergency injunction. Derek must have called in a favor with a judge or a corrupt clerk late last night, claiming I was a danger to my own finances. I looked at Brenda. She looked like she wanted to cry. She knew I wasn't crazy. She knew I balanced my checkbook down to the penny every month. Who authorized this? I asked, my voice calm but hard as flint. It says here the order came from the legal guardians pending court approval. Veronica Sterling and Derek Vance. They claimed you were making erratic large withdrawals and falling victim to scams. I had not withdrawn a dime in 2 weeks. It was a lie, a fabrication designed to starve me out. I thanked Brenda because it was not her fault and walked out of the bank. My hands were steady, but my blood was boiling. I reached into my pocket to grab my cell phone. I needed to call Harrison, my lawyer. I needed to unleash the dogs of war. I flipped open the phone and dialed Harrison's number. The call didn't go through. Instead of the ringing tone, I heard a recorded mechanical voice. We are sorry, but this service has been suspended at the request of the account holder. I stared at the phone. I had forgotten. Years ago, Veronica had convinced me to get on a family plan. It was cheaper, she said. It was easier for her to pay the bill and have me reimburse her. I had agreed because I didn't care about phone bills. Now I realized it wasn't about convenience. It was about control. She had cut me off. No money, no communication. They were trying to isolate me to make me feel small and helpless, so I would come crawling back to them, begging for their mercy. I felt a sudden pang of hunger. I hadn't eaten dinner the night before, and my stomach was growling. I decided to go to the grocery store. I had $20 in my wallet, enough for a loaf of bread, some eggs, and maybe a newspaper. I needed to feel normal. I needed to perform a simple human act, like buying food, to prove to myself that I still existed. I walked into the market and picked up a loaf of sourdough and a carton of milk. I stood in line behind a young mother with a crying baby. When it was my turn, I handed the cashier my credit card. I knew the bank account was frozen, but I hoped the credit card, which was issued by a different bank, might still work. The cashier swiped it. Declined. She swiped it again. Declined. Sir, do you have another form of payment? She asked loud enough for the line behind me to hear. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. It wasn't shame. It was fury. I was Augustus Sterling. I had audited multinational corporations. I had forced CEOs to resign in disgrace. I owned a silent stake in the very bank that had just declined my card. And here I was standing in a grocery store, unable to buy a loaf of bread because my son-in-law needed to cover his gambling losses. I put the $20 bill on the counter. Keep the change, I said. I took the bread and walked out, leaving the milk behind. I sat in my truck and ate a piece of dry bread, my jaw aching with the effort of chewing. It tasted like ash. This was what they wanted. They wanted to reduce me to this, a scavenging animal. I drove back to the farm. I needed to regroup. I needed to access my secure laptop and bypass their blockade. But as I turned onto the gravel road that led to my property, I saw it. A sign. It was brand new, bright orange, and staked firmly into the ground right next to my mailbox. Large black letters screamed at me. Property in dispute. Legal guardianship pending. No trespassing. They had moved faster than I thought possible. They were trying to stake a claim on my land before I could even fight back. I parked the truck and ripped the sign out of the ground, throwing it into the bed of the pickup. I walked into my house. It felt different now. It didn't feel safe. It felt like a fortress under siege. I went straight to the master bedroom. I pushed aside the heavy oak dresser that had belonged to Martha. Behind it, near the floorboard, was a small panel that looked like part of the molding. I pressed a hidden latch and it popped open. Inside was a dusty green metal ammunition box. I pulled it out and set it on the bed. My hands were covered in dust, but they didn't shake. I opened the latch. Inside was my emergency fund. I was a forensic auditor. I knew that banks could fail, that systems could crash, that enemies could freeze assets. I never fully trusted the digital world. Inside the box, wrapped in plastic bands, were stacks of $100 bills. $2,000 in total. It wasn't a fortune. It wasn't enough to buy a new life. But it was enough to survive. It was enough to buy ghost food and a cheap motel room if they managed to lock me out of the house. I counted the money. The smell of the old bills was comforting. It was the smell of independence. I put $500 in my wallet and hid the rest inside the lining of my old work boots. I looked at the picture of Martha on the nightstand. She was smiling that gentle smile that used to calm my storms. "They took my money, Martha," I whispered to the empty room. "They took my phone. They are trying to take our home. They think they have cut off my supply lines. They think I am an old man who will wither away without his creature comforts." I stood up and walked to the mirror. I looked at the man reflected there. He looked tired. He looked worn. But his eyes were clear. The fog of grief that had shrouded me for the last few years was gone, burned away by the heat of this betrayal. Derek and Veronica had made a critical error. They had stripped Gus the farmer of his resources. But in doing so, they had forced me to dig up Augustus Sterling. They thought they were burying me. They didn't realize they were planting a seed. And that seed was about to grow into a tree of poisonous fruit that they would be forced to eat. I grabbed a duffel bag. I packed 3 days of clothes, my secure laptop, which I kept offline for exactly this reason, and a small digital recorder. I wasn't going to wait for them to come with the sheriff to evict me. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me dragged out of my own home. I walked out the back door, leaving the keys on the kitchen table. I didn't lock the door. Let them come. Let them search. They would find nothing but the ghost of the father they had betrayed. I got into my truck and started the engine. The fuel gauge was low, but I had cash now. I drove away from the farm without looking back. The road to the Motel 6 on the edge of town was long, but I had plenty of time. My war had just begun. The neon sign of the Motel 6 buzzed with an electrical hum that sounded like an angry hornet trapped in a jar. The red light flickered rhythmically, casting a blood-colored shadow across the hood of my truck as I pulled into the cracked asphalt parking lot. It was located just off the interstate, a place where 18-wheelers idled and dreams went to die. I walked into the lobby, which smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. The night clerk, a young man with headphones around his neck and eyes that looked like he hadn't slept in a week, barely glanced at me. $49.99 a night, he mumbled, popping a bubble of gum. Cash or credit? Cash, I said, sliding a $50 bill across the scratched counter. Keep the penny. He handed me a plastic key card that felt greasy to the touch. Room 112 around back. Don't lose the key. It is a $20 replacement fee. I drove around the building, dodging potholes that looked deep enough to swallow a tire. Room 112 was on the ground floor, wedged between a vending machine that only dispensed disappointment and an ice machine that roared every 15 minutes. I parked the truck, grabbed my duffel bag and the heavy leather briefcase I had retrieved from the farm. The door stuck when I tried to open it, requiring a solid shove with my shoulder to let me in. I locked the door behind me and engaged the deadbolt and the chain. It was a habit from a lifetime ago when I used to stay in places like this, not because I was poor, but because I was hunting. When you are auditing a company that is laundering money for the cartels or the mob, you do not stay at the Ritz. You stay where you can see the parking lot and where nobody asks questions. I threw my duffel bag on the floor and sat on the edge of the mattress. It sagged under my weight, the springs groaning in protest. Through the thin curtains, which had a tear right down the middle, the red neon light pulsed. On off, on off. Every flash illuminated the peeling paint on the wall. Outside, a semi-truck engaged its air brakes, the hiss loud and sharp, followed by the rumble of a diesel engine that shook the window pane in its frame. I reached into my breast pocket and pulled out the small framed photograph of Martha. It was my favorite picture of her, taken on our 30th anniversary. She was laughing, her head thrown back, Her eyes crinkled with pure joy. I traced the line of her jaw with my thumb, my skin rough against the smooth glass. "I am sorry, Martha," I whispered into the empty room, my voice sounding raspy and foreign to my own ears. "I promised you. I promised I would keep her safe." Tears pricked my eyes, hot and stinging. They were not tears of self-pity. I did not feel sorry for myself for being in this dump. I had slept in ditches and foxholes and in boardrooms. I could handle a bad motel. No, these tears were born of a deep, agonizing failure of duty. I remembered the night Martha died. She had grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong, even as her life faded. "Gus," she had said, "promise me. Promise me you will look after Ronnie. She is soft, Gus. She does not see the world the way you do. Protect her." I had promised. I had sworn it on my life. And for the last few years, I thought protecting her meant giving her space, letting her make her own mistakes, stepping back so she could feel independent. I thought protecting her meant tolerating the man she chose even if I saw the greed behind his eyes. I was wrong. I had confused protecting her feelings with protecting her future. By letting Derek run wild, I had led the wolf right to her door and invited him in for dinner. Now protecting her meant something entirely different. It didn't mean paying her bills or fixing her flat tires. It meant destroying the cancer that was eating her life. It meant destroying her husband. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. The sadness evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hard resolve. It was a feeling I hadn't felt in 20 years. It was the feeling of the hunt. I placed Martha's picture on the nightstand next to the bolted-down lamp. "Watch me," I told her. "Watch me keep my promise." I reached for the leather briefcase. It was scuffed and worn, the brass buckles tarnished with age, but the leather was thick and the stitching was still tight. This bag had traveled with me from New York to London to Tokyo. It had held the secrets of Fortune 500 companies and the confessions of corrupt senators. I clicked the latches open. Snap, snap. The sound was loud in the small room. Inside there were no clothes, no toiletries. There was my past. First I pulled out the recorder. It was an old Olympus digital voice recorder, not one of those new smartphone apps that send your data to the cloud. This device was offline secure and reliable. I checked the batteries. Full charge. It was ready to catch every lie, every slip-up, every whisper Derek thought was safe. Next, I pulled out the ledger. It was a black moleskin notebook, the pages graph paper. I never trusted digital spreadsheets for the initial analysis. Handwriting slows the mind down, makes you see the patterns, the anomalies. When you write a number down, you feel its weight. I placed a silver Parker Jotter pen next to it. The click of that pen used to make CFOs sweat. Finally, I reached into the bottom of the bag and pulled out the beast. It was a Panasonic Toughbook, a military-grade laptop that looked more like a brick than a computer. It was thick, heavy, and ugly. It didn't have a webcam. It didn't have Bluetooth. The Wi-Fi card was physically switched off by a toggle on the side. It ran a custom operating system I had built myself decades ago. A Linux kernel stripped down to the bone, designed for one thing only: forensic data extraction and analysis. I set the laptop on the small round table near the window. I plugged it in. The screen flickered to life with a terminal prompt, green text on a black background. No icons, no friendly user interface, just raw command lines waiting for input. I sat in the uncomfortable wooden chair, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. The red neon light from outside bathed the room in a sinister glow. I wasn't Gus the gardener anymore. I wasn't the old man who forgot to close the gate. I was Augustus Sterling, the silencer. I cracked my knuckles. The sound was sharp like a pistol slide racking back. "Let us see what you are hiding, Derek," I whispered. I typed in my password, a string of 30 random characters that I had memorized 25 years ago. The system unlocked. I opened a new file in the directory and named it simply Target Vance. The first step wasn't hacking. It was information gathering, public records, tax liens, court filings, things that didn't require a warrant, just patience and knowing where to look. I connected the laptop to the internet using a secure encrypted dongle I kept in a hidden compartment of the bag. The connection was slow but invisible. I started typing. The rhythm of the keys was my heartbeat now. I felt the adrenaline knowing that somewhere out there Derek was probably laughing, drinking my wine thinking he had won. He didn't know that the game had just changed. He was playing checkers thinking he was a king. I was playing three-dimensional chess, and I was about to remove his board from the table entirely. The truck horns outside faded into background noise. The smell of smoke disappeared. The only thing that existed was the data, the numbers, the truth, and the truth was about to set me free and put Derek in a cage. I looked at Martha's picture one last time. "Sleep well, my love," I said. "I have work to do." The digital clock on the dashboard of my truck glowed a dull green, reading 3:03 in the morning. The world was asleep, but I was wide awake, my veins pumping with a cold, steady rhythm that I hadn't felt since the late 90s. I pulled into the rear service entrance of the generic office park where Derek leased his corporate suite. It was a soulless glass building off the highway, the kind of place that housed dental supply companies and fly-by-night telemarketing firms. Derek called it the global headquarters of Vance Development. I called it a crime scene waiting to be processed. I parked the truck in the shadows behind a row of industrial air conditioning units. The hum of the compressors masked the sound of my door closing. I pulled on a pair of thick nitrile gloves and grabbed a small heavy-duty flashlight. I didn't need a search warrant. I didn't need a badge. The Supreme Court had ruled decades ago that once trash hits the curb, it is public property. And Derek, for all his pretenses of being a sophisticated businessman, was lazy. He was the kind of man who thought he was too important to shred his own mistakes. I walked up to the large metal dumpster labeled with his suite number. It smelled of rot and damp cardboard. I didn't hesitate. I hoisted myself up, grabbing the rusty rim, and swung my legs over. I landed on a pile of black plastic bags with a soft crunch. For a man of 70, my knees protested, but my adrenaline silenced them. I was in the belly of the beast. I wasn't looking for everything. I was looking for the telltale signs of executive panic. I ignored the bags that felt light and full of paper cups. I was looking for the heavy, dense bags usually thrown out directly from the private office. I found 3 of them tied tight with expensive red drawstrings. I tossed them over the side of the dumpster, climbed out, and loaded them into the bed of my truck, covering them with a tarp. The whole operation took less than 8 minutes. Back at the Motel 6, I transformed the small round table into a forensic laboratory. I pulled the curtains tight and engaged the deadbolt. I laid out a clean white sheet I had brought from the farm and dumped the contents of the first bag. The smell hit me instantly. It wasn't just garbage. It was the smell of stress. Stale, high-end espresso dregs, half-eaten bagels that had gone rock hard, and empty blister packs of stomach ulcer medication. I sifted through the mess, my movements precise and methodical. Most people see trash. An auditor sees a timeline. An auditor sees the story of a man unraveling. I found what I was looking for at the bottom of the second bag. Derek had tried to destroy the evidence, but he had done it with the impatience of a child. He hadn't used a cross-cut shredder. He had simply torn the documents into quarters and eighths, violently ripping them apart, as if the paper itself had offended him. Then he had soaked them in coffee grounds, hoping to make them unreadable. Amateur, I whispered to myself. I spent the next 4 hours with a pair of tweezers and a roll of matte Scotch tape. Under the harsh light of the motel desk lamp, I pieced the papers back together like a jigsaw puzzle from hell. My eyes, which Derek thought were failing, scanned the lines of ink with the precision of a laser. The first document I reconstructed was a bank statement from a Cayman Islands shell company called DV Holdings. Derek had bragged at dinner that he had millions in offshore liquidity. The statement told a different story. The balance was negative, heavily negative. There were wire transfers going out to online gambling sites, amounts that would make a normal man vomit. 50,000 here, 100,000 there. All losses. But that was just the appetizer. The main course was a series of crumpled invoices and emails printed out, and then angrily balled up. I smoothed them out using the edge of my lighter to flatten the creases. They were regarding the Vance Heights project. Derek had sold the dream of a luxury, eco-friendly community. He had taken deposits. I found a list of names. 20 families, retirees, young couples. They had each put down $50,000 to $100,000 for homes that were supposed to be built on my land. Then I found the permits, or rather, the rejection letters. The county had denied his zoning application 6 months ago. The land was designated as a protected watershed. He couldn't build a doghouse on that land, let alone a subdivision. But he hadn't told the investors that. He was still taking their money. I pinned the papers to the wall, creating a map of his deception. It was a classic Ponzi scheme. He was using the deposit money from the new investors to pay the monthly interest on his personal debts and to keep up the appearance of wealth. The Mercedes, the dinners, the suits, it was all paid for with stolen money. But the final piece of the puzzle, the one that made my blood run cold, was a letter I found at the bottom of the third bag. It wasn't torn. It was crumpled into a tight ball as if he had squeezed it with all his might. It was on heavy cardstock, no letterhead, just a typed message. Mr. Vance, your extension has expired. The principal amount of $4 million plus the accrued interest is due by the 15th of this month. We do not accept excuses. We accept assets. If you do not have the liquidity, we will take the collateral. You listed the Sterling farm as your primary asset. Deliver the deed, or we will come for you personally. I stared at the paper. The date on the letter was 3 days ago. The 15th was next week. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Derek wasn't just greedy. He was terrified. He had borrowed $4 million from a shadow lender, a hard money loan shark, likely connected to organized crime. He had put up my farm, my home, my legacy as collateral for a loan he had no right to take. He didn't just want to sell the farm to a developer. He needed the title immediately to hand over to these sharks to save his own life. That was why the rush. That was why the emergency guardianship. He was literally days away from having his legs broken or worse. I leaned back in the creaky wooden chair and rubbed my eyes. The sun was starting to peek through the torn curtains, painting the room in a dusty gray light. I looked at the wall covered in taped-together lies. My daughter was married to a man who was essentially a walking corpse, and he was planning to throw me into the fire to save himself. He thought I was the easy mark. He thought he could just sign my name, hand over the deed, and walk away clean while I rotted in a state facility. I picked up the demand letter. $4 million. To a man like Derek, that was an insurmountable mountain. To Augustus Sterling, the man who silently owned shares in the very financial institutions that tracked these kinds of shadow movements, it was just a number that I could use as a weapon. I reached for my secure laptop. I needed to know who was behind this loan. I needed to trace the routing number at the bottom of the demand letter. I typed in the code, my fingers flying across the keyboard. The terminal window scrolled with green text. It took me 10 minutes to find the shell company behind the loan. It was a subsidiary of a subsidiary, but the trail led back to a private equity firm in Chicago, notorious for predatory lending. And the beautiful irony was that my investment portfolio held a significant silent position in their parent company. I wasn't just his father-in-law. I wasn't just his victim. Technically, I was his boss's boss's boss. I looked at the clock. It was 7 in the morning. The banks would open in 2 hours. I had enough evidence here to send Derek to prison for 20 years for fraud, embezzlement, and larceny. But prison was too easy. Prison was safe. Derek had tried to humiliate me. He had tried to strip me of my dignity. I wanted him to feel the fear he had inflicted on me. I wanted him to stand in that courtroom thinking he had won only to watch the floor drop out from under him. I carefully took down the papers from the wall. I scanned each one into the laptop, creating a digital dossier that was bulletproof. Then I placed the originals into a waterproof envelope and locked them in the briefcase. I stood up and stretched my back, cracking audibly. I felt stronger than I had in years. The fatigue was gone, replaced by a cold clarity. I went to the small bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. The stubble was gray, the wrinkles were deep, but the eyes were dangerous. "You picked the wrong farmer, Derek," I said to the reflection. I packed up my equipment. I had the ammunition. Now I needed to set the stage. I needed to let him think his plan was working perfectly. I needed him to walk into that courtroom feeling invincible. Because the higher he climbed, the more satisfying the fall would be. I grabbed my hat, put on my flannel shirt, and walked out into the morning light, ready to play the role of the helpless old fool one last time. The morning sun did not bring warmth, it only brought clarity. After a sleepless night in the motel room surrounded by the reconstructed evidence of Derek's financial ruin, I knew I was missing one final piece of the puzzle. I knew Derek was desperate, and I knew he was broke, but I still did not understand why he had targeted my farm specifically. There were plenty of other assets he could have tried to liquidate. Why my land? Why now? To the untrained eye, my property was just 80 acres of scrub oak and rocky soil on the wrong side of the county line. It was good for growing tomatoes and raising a few chickens, but it was hardly the kind of asset that could cover a $4 million gambling debt. Unless I was missing something. Unless the land wasn't just land. I packed my laptop into the briefcase, left the motel, and drove to the county public library. It was the only place where I could access the city planning archives without raising suspicion. The internet is good for surface information, but if you want the deep secrets, the kind that are buried in the basements of bureaucracy, you have to look at the physical maps. You have to look at the blueprints that haven't been digitized yet. I walked into the reference section, the smell of old paper and dust filling my lungs. It was a familiar scent. I had spent half my career in rooms like this, hunting down assets that CEOs tried to hide in the footnotes of history. I asked the librarian for the master zoning file and the proposed infrastructure development plans for the next fiscal decade. She looked at me over her glasses, probably wondering why an old man in a flannel shirt cared about municipal zoning, but she handed over the heavy binders anyway. I took them to a table in the back corner, away from the prying eyes of the few students studying for exams. I opened the binder for my district. At first glance, everything looked normal. My land was zoned agricultural, just as it always had been. But then I cross-referenced it with the state infrastructure proposal, a document that had been filed only 2 weeks ago and was currently buried in a subcommittee waiting for approval. And there it was, a thick red line cutting right across the map. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't a sinkhole, and it wasn't an aquifer. It was something far more lucrative. The state was planning a bypass, a massive expansion of Interstate 44, designed to relieve the congestion downtown. And right there on page 214 was the proposed location for the main interchange. The exit ramp, the logistics hub. It was laid out perfectly. The off-ramp curved directly into the heart of my property. I sat back in the hard wooden chair and let out a low whistle. My land was no longer just a farm. In the eyes of a developer, it was the future gateway to the city. Once that highway was approved, my 80 acres would be rezoned from agricultural to commercial industrial. It would be the perfect location for a massive distribution center, a luxury outlet mall, or a hotel complex. I did the mental math quickly. As farmland, it was worth maybe $500,000 on a good day. As a prime commercial interchange with direct highway access, it was worth at least $150,000 an acre. $12 million. My hands shook slightly as I turned the page. The value wasn't speculative. It was imminent. The proposal was scheduled for a final vote in the state Senate in 45 days. Once that vote passed, the land value would skyrocket overnight. Derek knew. Somehow, that snake knew. He probably had a buddy in the planning commission, or he had overheard a tip at one of his high-stakes poker games. He knew that if he could get control of the land now, he could flip it for a fortune in 2 months. But that still didn't explain the rush. Why the emergency guardianship? Why the frantic ambush at my birthday party? If the vote wasn't for 45 days, he had time. I dug deeper. I went to the public computer terminal and logged into the county clerk's database using a guest pass. I searched for any recent filings related to my address. Nothing under my name. Nothing under Derek's name. So I searched for the shell company I had found in his trash. DV Holdings. And there it was. A document filed just 10 days ago. It was a memorandum of understanding, a pre-sale contract. Derek had already sold the land. He had signed a contract with a massive commercial real estate conglomerate out of Chicago. He had promised to deliver the deed to my farm along with the mineral and water rights within 30 days in exchange for a signing bonus of $4 million and a back-end payout of $8 million once the highway bill passed. The contract was brutal. It had a performance clause. If Derek failed to deliver the clear title by the deadline, he would be in breach of contract. He would not only lose the deal, but he would be liable for a penalty fee of $2 million. I looked at the date on the contract. He had signed it 10 days ago. That meant he had 20 days left. The pieces slammed together in my mind with the force of a train wreck. Derek didn't just need the money to pay off the loan sharks. He had already spent the money in his head. He had likely promised the loan sharks that he would pay them next month using the advance from this land deal. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul, but he didn't own Peter's wallet yet. He had sold my home out from under me before he even owned it. He was gambling with my life. But the realization that truly terrified me wasn't about the money. It was about Veronica. I stared at the glowing screen, the cursor blinking next to Derek's digital signature. He had signed as the authorized agent of the estate. He had lied on a legal document claiming he already had the authority to sell. If this deal fell through, Derek wouldn't just be broke. He would be destroyed. The loan sharks would come for his legs. The real estate conglomerate would sue him for millions. He would go to prison for fraud. He was a cornered rat. And Veronica was in the cage with him. She didn't know. I was certain of it. She thought he was a brilliant businessman who had hit a rough patch. She thought she was being a supportive wife by helping him secure the family assets. She had no idea that she was sleeping next to a man who had essentially strapped a bomb to their lives and handed the detonator to the highest bidder. If I refused to sign, if I fought him, Derek would get desperate. And a desperate man is a dangerous man. What would he do when the deadline got closer? Would he stage an accident? Would he tamper with my brakes? Would he put something in my coffee the next time I visited? Or worse, would he use Veronica as leverage? Would he force her to sign fraudulent documents implicating her in his crimes? If this blew up, she would go down with him. She was listed as an officer in his company. She was his wife. The law would see them as partners in crime. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I had been worried about my dignity, about my house, about my pride. But this was so much bigger. My daughter was living on top of a volcano, and the ground was already smoking. I closed the browser window and wiped my history. I walked out of the library into the bright afternoon sun, but I felt like I was walking through a graveyard. I got back into my truck and sat there for a long time staring at the steering wheel. I had the evidence. I had the motive. I knew exactly what his plan was. He needed me declared incompetent so he could sign the transfer of deed as my guardian. That was the only way he could deliver the land in time. He needed a judge to hand him the keys to my kingdom so he could sell it for scrap to save his own skin. I started the engine. The rumble of the old Ford felt reassuring. It was solid. It was real. Unlike Derek's life, which was a house of cards built on a foundation of lies. I had to stop him. But I couldn't just stop him. If I simply blocked the sale, the loan sharks would kill him, and they might come after Veronica too to collect the debt. If I went to the police now, it would drag on for months, and in the meantime the deadline would pass and the penalties would crush them. No, I needed a surgical strike. I needed to destroy Derek's ability to harm us while insulating Veronica from the fallout. I needed to take control of the debt myself. I remembered the name of the private equity firm behind the loan sharks from my research the night before. BlackRock Capital. Not the famous one, just a cheap knockoff name designed to sound impressive. But I knew their parent company. I knew the man who sat on the board of directors. We had played golf together in the 90s. A plan began to form in my mind. A plan so audacious, so risky, that the old Gus the farmer would have had a heart attack just thinking about it. But Augustus Sterling. The silencer smiled. I put the truck in gear. I wasn't going back to the farm. I wasn't going back to the motel. I had one more stop to make. I needed to see my daughter. I needed to look into her eyes one last time and see if there was anything left of the girl I raised. I needed to give her a chance to jump off the train before I blew up the tracks. I drove toward the diner where Veronica's mother used to work 30 years ago. It was a neutral ground, a place of memories. I would ask her to meet me there. It was a long shot. She probably wouldn't come. But I had to try. I had to offer her a lifeline even if I knew she would probably use it to try and hang me. Because that is what fathers do. We try to save our children even when they are holding the knife. But this would be the last time. If she chose him today, she was choosing her fate, and I would not be able to stop the avalanche that was coming for her husband. I drove my truck to the outskirts of town to a gas station that time had forgotten. It was one of the few places left that still had a working payphone bolted to the brick wall outside. My cell phone was a dead brick in my pocket, cut off by the daughter I had raised, so I had to do this the old-fashioned way. I fed a handful of quarters into the slot, the metallic clink echoing the hollowness in my chest. I dialed Veronica's number from memory. My fingers knew the pattern better than they knew the shape of my own face. She answered on the third ring, her voice breathless and irritated. "Hello, who is this?" "It is me, Ronnie," I said, letting my voice crack just a little. "I need to see you, please. Just you." I heard her sigh, a long, exasperated sound that traveled through the wire and settled in my gut. "Daddy, I do not have time for this. Derek is meeting with his lawyers and I have appointments. It is important, Veronica." I pleaded, leaning my forehead against the cold metal of the phone box. "It is about Mom. It is about the diner. Meet me at the Bluebird in an hour, please. Just give an old man 10 minutes. There was a silence on the line. I knew she was weighing her schedule against her guilt. Finally, she agreed, but her tone was sharp. 30 minutes, Daddy. And do not make a scene." The Bluebird Diner was a relic of a different era. It sat on Route 9, a chrome and neon beacon that smelled of bacon grease and stale coffee. Martha had worked here when she was 20 years old, wearing a pink uniform and saving every tip in a jar so we could buy our first tractor. It was sacred ground. If Veronica couldn't find her heart here, she wouldn't find it anywhere. I arrived early. I went into the bathroom and splashed water on my face, but I didn't try to tidy up. In fact, I did the opposite. I unbuttoned my collar, letting my gray chest hair show. I messed up my hair so it stuck up in tufts. I let my hands shake. I wanted to look exactly like the frail, confused old man Derek told her I was. I needed to know if she would help that man or if she would discard him. I sat in a booth near the back, the vinyl seat cracked and taped over with duct tape. I ordered a black coffee. My hands trembled as I lifted the cup, spilling a little on the table. The waitress, a kind woman named Sal, looked at me with pity. "You okay there, honey?" she asked. I just nodded, keeping up the act. 10 minutes later, Veronica walked in. The bell above the door jingled, announcing her arrival like a queen entering a stable. She was wearing oversized sunglasses and a scarf that probably cost more than the waitress made in a month. She scanned the room, her nose wrinkled in disgust, as if the smell of honest work offended her. When she saw me, her shoulders slumped. She walked over, clicking her heels on the linoleum floor, and sat down opposite me without taking off her glasses. "You look terrible, Daddy," she said bluntly, placing her designer bag on the seat beside her, as if to create a barrier between us. Derek was right. "You are not taking care of yourself. Look at you. You are shaking." I put the coffee cup down, rattling it against the saucer. "I am shaking because I am scared, Ronnie," I said, looking at her over the rim of the cup. "Not for me. For you." She rolled her eyes and checked her watch. A diamond-studded timepiece that Derek had likely bought with credit he didn't have. "I have a manicure at 2, Daddy." "What is this about? Why did you bring up Mom?" I reached across the table, palm open. "Ronnie, listen to me. I know things. I know about Derek's debts. I know he is in trouble with bad people. He is lying to you, honey. He is using you." Veronica pulled back as if I had tried to slap her. She crossed her arms, her face hardening. "Stop it. Just stop it. You are paranoid. Derek told me you would say things like this. He said your dementia would make you suspicious. He is a successful developer, Daddy. He is building an empire for us. He is building a prison, Veronica," I whispered, leaning in. "He has sold the farm. He signed a contract before he even owned the land. He needs that guardianship so he can hand over the deed to cover his gambling losses. If you sign those papers, you are helping him commit fraud. You will go down with him when it blows up." She laughed, a harsh, brittle sound that drew stares from the other booths. "Gambling losses. Fraud. Listen to yourself. You sound insane. This is exactly why we need to take control. You are inventing conspiracy theories because you are afraid of losing control. It is sad, really." I felt a tear slide down my cheek. It wasn't part of the act. "Ronnie, look at me. I am your father. I carried you on my shoulders. I taught you to ride a bike. Have I ever lied to you? Have I ever hurt you?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second. I saw a flicker of doubt behind those dark glasses, but then she looked at her watch again. She thought about her mansion. She thought about her status. She thought about the life Derek promised her. "You are sick, Daddy," she said, her voice cold again. "You need help. Professional help." I took a deep breath. I had one card left to play. The most dangerous one. "Leave him, Ronnie," I said, my voice steady and low. "Leave him today. Pack a bag. Come with me. I will take care of you. I have resources you do not know about. I can protect you. We can fix this. Just you and me, like before." She stared at me. For a moment I thought I had reached her. I thought the daughter who used to bring me lemonade in the garden was still in there somewhere. But then she shook her head, a look of pity and disgust crossing her face. "Resources," she scoffed. "You cannot even buy a sandwich, Daddy. Your account is frozen. You are living in a motel. I saw your truck outside. It is an embarrassment." She reached into her purse. I watched her movements in slow motion. She pulled out a crisp leather wallet and extracted a single $100 bill. She folded it in half and slid it across the table, avoiding my hand as if I were contagious. "Here," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Take this. Get yourself a hot meal and maybe a haircut. And stop this nonsense." I looked at the money. Benjamin Franklin stared back at me, green and judging. It was a handout, a bribe, a way to pay off her conscience so she could go get her nails done without thinking about her father rotting in a motel room. "Do not embarrass me anymore," she hissed, leaning in close. "Sign the papers, Daddy. Do it for your own good. We found a lovely facility for you. It is high-end. They have a garden. You can grow your tomatoes there and stop worrying about things you do not understand. Derek is trying to save you from yourself. Stop fighting him." She stood up, smoothing her skirt. "I have to go. My nail tech charges for cancellations." She turned and walked away. The bell jingled again. She didn't look back. She walked out of this diner, out of my life, and straight back into the arms of the man who was using her as a human shield. I sat there for a long time, staring at the $100 bill. The waitress Sal came over with the coffee pot. She looked at the money, then at me. "Kids break your heart, do not they?" she said softly, pouring me a refill. I picked up the bill. My hand wasn't shaking anymore. The tremor was gone. The fear was gone. The hope was gone. "Yes, Sal," I said, my voice clear and strong. "They do. But sometimes you have to let them break so you can fix them properly." I folded the bill neatly and placed it in the breast pocket of my flannel shirt right over my heart. I wasn't going to spend it. I wasn't going to buy food with it. I was going to keep it. It was a receipt for the transaction that had just occurred. My daughter had just sold her father for a manicure and a lie. I stood up and dropped a $20 bill on the table for the coffee. I put my hat on, pulling the brim low. I walked out of the Bluebird Diner. The sun was shining, but the world felt gray. I walked to the payphone one last time. I had one more call to make. I dialed Harrison's private number. He picked up on the first ring. "Gus," he asked, "how did it go?" I looked at the diner where my wife used to work, where my daughter had just treated me like a beggar. "It is done, Harry," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "Initiate the Phoenix Protocol. Let them win the preliminary hearing. Let them think I am weak. Let them drag me into that courtroom." "Are you sure?" Gus Harrison asked. "Once we start this, there is no going back. She is your daughter." I patted the pocket with the $100 bill. "I have no daughter," I said. "Not anymore. I only have a defendant." I hung up the phone. The line went dead, and so did the last remnant of the man I used to be. Augustus Sterling was back, and he was coming for blood. Back in the suffocating confinement of room 112 at the Motel 6, I put on my headphones and adjusted the volume on the receiver. The digital recorder was picking up a signal from the bug I had planted in Derek's office during my midnight trash run. It was a simple device, a relic from the Cold War era, but it transmitted with crystal clarity. The sound of Derek's voice filled my ears, arrogant and loud, overlaying the hum of the motel's air conditioner. He was on the phone, and the conversation I heard made the bile rise in my throat. He wasn't talking to a contractor or a banker. He was talking to a man named Dr. Aris. I knew Aris by reputation. He was a psychiatrist who operated out of a strip mall clinic, a man who had lost his hospital privileges years ago for overprescribing opioids, but who had found a lucrative niche market in providing expert testimony for high-conflict divorces and contested wills. He was a gun for hire with a medical degree. "So let me get this straight, Doc," Derek was saying, his voice dripping with greasy charm. "You review the file I sent over, the one with the notes about the open gate and the stove, and you can give a professional opinion without actually examining him." There was a pause, and then Aris's voice slithered through the speaker, smooth and transactional. "Hypothetically speaking, Mr. Vance, if the behavioral evidence is consistent, I can sign an affidavit attesting that the subject exhibits classic signs of stage 4 Alzheimer's with paranoid delusions. Paranoid delusions are key. It explains why he would refuse help or act hostile toward loving family members. It invalidates his testimony. If he says you are stealing from him, well, that is just the disease talking." "Exactly," Derek laughed, a sound that made me grip the edge of the table. That is exactly what I need. And the fee? 5,000, Iris replied. Cash. Half now, half when the judge signs the order. Done, Derek said. I will have a courier drop it off this afternoon. Make it look scary, Doc. Use all the big Latin words. I want the judge to think letting him walk free is a public safety hazard. I took off the headphones and set them down gently. They were planning to lobotomize me legally. They were going to paint me as a raving lunatic to invalidate everything I knew. It was a classic move. Discredit the witness before he can take the stand. If I walked into court claiming Derek was a fraud and I had a medical diagnosis of paranoia attached to my name, no one would believe me. I would just be the crazy old man shouting at clouds. But Derek had made a fatal assumption. He assumed I was actually sick. He assumed that if I went to a doctor, the results would be ambiguous enough to support his lies. He didn't know that my mind was the only thing I had kept perfectly sharpened over the last 40 years. I needed to prove my sanity. But I couldn't just go to a local doctor. Derek might have gotten to them too. I needed indisputable proof. I needed the gold standard. The next morning at 4 a.m., I drove 3 hours east to the University State Hospital, the most prestigious neurological research center in the region. I checked in under my real name, but I used my old passport for identification, the one that didn't have my current address. I paid in cash so there would be no insurance trail for Derek to find. I requested a full cognitive battery. The works. The next 6 hours were grueling but exhilarating. I sat in a sterile white room while a team of young, earnest neurologists ran me through the ringer. I took the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale. I took the mini mental state examination. I did memory recall tests that required me to repeat strings of numbers backward and forward. I underwent a functional MRI to map the electrical activity of my brain. I felt like an athlete back on the field. My brain, which had been starved of intellectual challenge for so long, woke up. It roared to life. I remembered sequences they showed me for 3 seconds. I solved logic puzzles faster than the residents could time them. I recited the details of a story they had read to me an hour prior, word for word, including the inflection of the reader's voice. At the end of the day, the lead neurologist, Dr. Chen, came in holding a thick file. He looked bewildered. "Mr. Sterling," he said, adjusting his glasses. "I have to be honest. We usually see some cognitive decline in men of your age. It is natural. But your results are, well, they are anomalous." "Anomalous good or anomalous bad?" I asked, buttoning my flannel shirt. "Extraordinary," he corrected himself. "Your IQ tested at 145. That is in the 99th percentile. Your recall is near eidetic. There is absolutely no sign of beta amyloid plaque buildup in your MRI. Your brain is not shrinking, Mr. Sterling. If anything, it is hyperactive. You have the cognitive processing speed of a 30-year-old. You are not only competent, you are likely the sharpest person in this building." I smiled. "Can you put that in writing, doctor? A certified affidavit with the hospital seal?" He did. I walked out of that hospital with a sealed envelope that was my shield. It was the bulletproof vest that would stop Dr. Aris's poison. But a shield wasn't enough. I needed a sword. And to use the sword effectively, I needed Derek to drop his guard. I needed him to be so confident, so arrogant, that he wouldn't bother to double-check his facts. I needed him to believe he had already won. I drove back to the motel and opened my laptop. It was time to do a little creative writing. I opened a graphic design program and pulled up a template I had created years ago for sting operations. I crafted a fake medical report. I used the logo of a mediocre walk-in clinic on the other side of the county. I created a fictional doctor named Dr. A.J. Smith, a name so generic it defied suspicion. In this report, I painted a picture of a man in rapid decline. I used the medical terminology I had learned over the years, weaving a narrative of confusion, disorientation, and short-term memory loss. I wrote that the patient, Augustus Sterling, was unable to recall the current year, unable to perform simple arithmetic, and exhibited signs of agitation and persecution complex. I gave myself a score of 18 on the cognitive exam, a score that screamed dementia. It was a masterpiece of fiction. It confirmed every lie Derek had told Veronica. It was exactly what he wanted to see. Now I had to deliver it. I couldn't just mail it to him. That would look suspicious. It had to be intercepted. It had to look like a mistake, a slip-up by a confused old man. I printed the fake report on cheap paper and folded it messily, stuffing it into an envelope addressed to myself. I scribbled "Return to sender" on the front in shaky handwriting, as if I had been too confused to open my own mail. Then I drove to the farm. I knew Derek's private investigator, a man named Thorne, who was as cheap as his suit, was watching the place. I had spotted his gray sedan parked down the road near the tree line twice. I parked my truck by the mailbox. I got out, acting disoriented, looking around wildly, as if I didn't know where I was. I walked to the mailbox and shoved the envelope inside, leaving the red flag up. Then I stumbled back to the truck and drove away, weaving slightly within the lane, just enough to look impaired. I parked a mile down the road and hiked back through the woods, using an old deer trail I had cleared with Jamal years ago. I set up a position behind a fallen oak tree with a pair of binoculars. I waited. It didn't take long. 20 minutes later, the gray sedan rolled up. The investigator got out, looked left and right, and then walked quickly to my mailbox. He opened it, grabbed the envelope, and practically ran back to his car. I watched him tear it open through the windshield. I saw him pull out the fake medical report. I saw him pull out his phone and dial a number. Even from this distance, I could see the excitement on his face. He was calling Derek. He was telling him he had the smoking gun. I hiked back to my truck, my boots crunching softly on the dry leaves. It was done. Derek would get that report within the hour. He would show it to Veronica. "Look, Ronnie," he would say. "Even the doctors say he is gone. It is a mercy to take control. He does not know what he is doing. He would file the papers tomorrow morning. He would attach my fake report as Exhibit A. He would walk into court believing he was fighting a ghost. He wouldn't research the clinic. He wouldn't verify the doctor. He was too lazy and too desperate for that. The confirmation bias would blind him completely. I drove back to the Motel 6, feeling a dark satisfaction settling in my chest. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Now all I had to do was wait for the snap. I spent the rest of the night preparing my real evidence. I organized the bank records, the contract from the land sale, the audio recordings, and the real medical report from the university. I placed them all in the worn leather briefcase in a specific order, ready to be deployed like tactical nukes. I looked at the suit I had bought the day before. It was hanging in the closet, wrapped in plastic. A charcoal gray wool suit, tailored and sharp. It was the uniform of Augustus Sterling, but I wouldn't wear it tomorrow. Not yet. Tomorrow I would wear the costume Derek expected. I would wear the flannel and the mud. I would play the part until the very last second, until the door of the trap slammed shut behind him. I lay down on the lumpy mattress and closed my eyes. For the first time in months, I didn't hear the trucks on the highway. I only heard the rhythmic ticking of a clock counting down the seconds until Derek Vance's life fell apart. The silencer was ready, and the courtroom was waiting. The sun filtering through the high windows of courtroom 402 seemed to spotlight the dust motes dancing in the air, a stark contrast to the heavy, suffocating tension that had settled over the room. Judge Finch sat back in his leather chair, his face a mask of professional neutrality, though I could see the sheen of sweat on his upper lip. He knew who I was, but he also knew the law. He had to let the play run its course. He had to give Derek enough rope to hang himself. Derek's lawyer, Mr. Thorne, stood up, buttoning his cheap suit jacket. He walked to the center of the room, holding the fake medical report I had planted as if it were the 10 Commandments. "Your Honor," Thorne began, his voice booming with theatrical concern. We are not here to punish Mr. Sterling. We are here to save him. The evidence is irrefutable. Exhibit A clearly shows a diagnosis of advanced dementia and paranoia. Exhibit B photographs of the defendant living in a squalid motel room, unable to maintain his own hygiene or finances. He is a danger to himself. He is a man lost in the twilight of his life, and my clients, his loving daughter and son-in-law, simply wish to guide him into a safe harbor. He turned to look at me, a look of practiced pity plastered on his face. Look at him. Your Honor, he is confused. He is disheveled. He likely does not even understand why he is here today. Granting this guardianship is not just legal, it is an act of mercy. Derek nodded solemnly from his table, dabbing his dry eyes with a handkerchief. Veronica looked down, her hands twisting in her lap. She believed it. She believed the lie because it was easier than facing the truth. Thorne sat down looking like a cat that had just eaten the canary. Judge Finch cleared his throat. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine for a sign. Mr. Sterling, he said, his voice steady but respectful. You have heard the petition. You have the right to counsel. Do you wish to request a court-appointed attorney, or do you have representation present? The room went silent. Derek smirked, expecting me to mumble or ask for a delay. I stood up. I didn't push the chair back noisily. I rose with the fluid-controlled power of a man who has spent 40 years dominating boardrooms. I straightened my spine. I adjusted the collar of my flannel shirt as if it were a silk tie. I looked directly at Harry Finch. No, Your Honor, I said. My voice was no longer the raspy whisper of a broken old man. It was a baritone weapon, polished and cold. I do not require an attorney. I will represent myself pro se. Thorne laughed, a short barking sound. Your Honor, surely you cannot allow this. The man is medically incompetent. He cannot represent himself. It is a mockery of the court. Overruled, Finch said sharply, slamming his gavel down before Thorne could finish. Mr. Sterling has the right to be heard. Proceed, Mr. Sterling. I walked out from behind the defendant's table. I didn't walk with a limp. I walked with purpose. I approached the witness stand, where Derek had been called to testify earlier, regarding the value of my estate. I looked at Derek. He looked back, his eyes narrowing. He sensed the change. He saw the predator behind the prey's mask, but he was too arrogant to run. Mr. Vance, I began, my voice filling the room without the need for a microphone. You stated under oath 5 minutes ago that my farm is essentially worthless. You called it a burden. You said the soil is toxic and the location is undesirable. Is that correct? Derek leaned into the microphone, his smile condescending. That is right, Gus. It is a money pit. We just want to get it off your hands so you do not have to pay the property taxes anymore. We are doing you a favor. A favor, I repeated, tasting the word. Interesting. So if the land is worthless trash, why did you file a memorandum of understanding with the Nexus Development Group 10 days ago? Derek's smile faltered. His eyes flicked to his lawyer, then back to me. I do not know what you are talking about. You are confused, Gus. I reached into my worn leather briefcase. I didn't pull out a sandwich or a dirty rag. I pulled out a crisp, clean document with a blue legal cover. I walked up to the witness stand and placed it in front of him. Refresh your memory, Derek, I said softly. This is a contract dated March 12th. It is signed by you as the authorized agent of the Sterling estate. It details the sale of my 80 acres for the sum of $12 million pending the approval of the state highway expansion. The room erupted. Veronica gasped loudly, her hand flying to her mouth. The gallery murmured. Thorne stood up, objecting loudly about relevance and authentication, but I ignored him. I kept my eyes pinned on Derek. He picked up the document, his hands shaking uncontrollably. The paper rattled against the wood of the stand. He looked at the signature. His signature. I do not... This is... He stammered, the sweat breaking out on his forehead, instantly washing away his composure. And tell me, Mr. Vance, I continued, relentless. If the land is worthless, why does this bank statement from your Cayman Islands shell company DV Holdings show a wire transfer deposit of $500,000 from Nexus Development on that same day? A deposit labeled signing bonus. I pulled out the second document, the bank record I had reconstructed from his trash. I slammed it down next to the contract. Derek turned a shade of gray that looked like wet cement. He looked at Veronica. She was staring at him, her eyes wide with horror and realization. She hadn't known. He had sold her father's home for $12 million and told her it was worthless. He had pocketed $500,000 while she gave me a $100 bill for charity. You lied to the court, Derek, I said, leaning in close so only he could hear the steel in my voice. You committed perjury. But that is the least of your problems. Because you spent that deposit, didn't you? You sent it to a sportsbook in Las Vegas, and now the loan sharks are calling. Derek looked at me, and for the first time I saw genuine terror. He realized that the old man in the flannel shirt knew everything. He realized he wasn't looking at a victim. He was looking at his executioner. Your Honor, Thorne shouted, desperate to regain control. This is ambush by trial. These documents are not verified. Mr. Sterling is obviously forging papers in his delusional state. Judge Finch looked at the documents. He looked at Derek's sweating face. He looked at me. Mr. Vance, the judge, said, his voice cold as ice. Answer the question. Did you or did you not accept a deposit for the sale of Mr. Sterling's land without his consent? Derek opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish on a hook, gasping for air. The silence stretched thin and tight, ready to snap. He can't answer, Your Honor, I said, stepping back. Because if he says yes, he admits to fraud. And if he says no, he admits to perjury because I have the transaction number right here. I turned to the gallery. I looked at my daughter. She was crying, silent tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. She finally saw the monster sitting next to her. I am not done, Your Honor, I said, turning back to the judge. I have more. I have the audio recordings. Derek stood up so fast his chair flew backward. You illegal old bat, he screamed, losing all control. You tapped my office. That is inadmissible. You are the criminal here. Sit down, Mr. Vance. Judge Finch bellowed, banging his gavel. I smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile. I didn't tap your office, Derek, I said calmly. I audited it. And I found something else. Something that concerns my daughter. I reached into the briefcase again. This was the kill shot. This was the end. Objection, Your Honor. Thorne screamed, his face turning a blotchy red as he pointed an accusing finger at me. This has gone on long enough. We are listening to the ravings of a senile old man. Look at him. He is wearing flannel in a court of law. He lives in a motel room that costs $40 a night. He is a dirt-poor farmer who probably thinks the radio is talking to him. He is not an auditor. He is a nobody. A broke, destitute nobody who is wasting the court's valuable time with these fantasies. The insult hung in the air like smoke. Derek sneered, regaining a shred of his confidence. He nodded vigorously, looking at the gallery, as if to say, I told you he was crazy. Veronica looked at me with pity, shaking her head slowly, mouthing the word, please, to me, begging me to stop humiliating myself. But then a sound cut through the noise. It was the sharp, authoritative crack of a gavel striking wood. Once, twice, 3 times. Each strike was louder than the last, silencing the murmurs, silencing Thorne, silencing the world. Counselor. Sit down, Judge Finch boomed. His voice wasn't just loud. It was heavy with a mixture of anger and reverence. But Your Honor, Thorne sputtered. I said, sit down, Finch roared. And be very careful with your next words, Mr. Thorne. You just called one of the most brilliant financial minds of the 20th century a nobody. If you insult him again in my courtroom, I will hold you in contempt so fast your head will spin." The room froze. Thorne sat down slowly, his mouth hanging open. Derek frowned, looking at the judge as if Finch had suddenly started speaking a foreign language. Veronica leaned forward, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "Who is he talking about?" "Derek," she whispered, her voice trembling. Judge Finch stood up. He didn't look at the lawyers. He looked at the gallery, addressing the entire room. "For the record," he said, his voice steady and solemn, "the man standing before you is not just a farmer. His name is Augustus Sterling. In 1998, 2 years before the rest of the world knew what was happening, this man identified the irregularities in the Enron Corporation. He was the forensic auditor who brought down the monoliths of Wall Street in the 80s. He has served as a silent financial advisor to 3 governors of this state. He is known in the industry as the silencer because when he walks into a boardroom, the lies stop. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. You could hear the intake of breath from the court reporter." Veronica stared at me. Her eyes were wide, searching my face, trying to find the father she thought she knew inside the legend the judge was describing. "Daddy," she whispered the word barely audible. "Is that true?" I didn't look at her. I couldn't. Not yet. I kept my eyes locked on Derek. The color had drained from his face completely. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing in a cage with a tiger he thought was a house cat. Thorne tried to rally. "Your Honor, with all due respect, that was decades ago. Past glories do not change current realities. The man is clearly destitute. He has no assets. He cannot even afford a suit." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Destitute," I repeated. "Is that what you think?" I walked back to the defendant's table. I picked up my worn leather briefcase. It looked old. It looked cheap. But what was inside was worth more than Derek's entire life. I placed it on the railing of the witness stand, right in front of Derek's sweating face. I clicked the latches open. The sound echoed in the quiet room. Snap. Snap. I didn't reach for a ham sandwich or a dirty rag. I reached into the main compartment and pulled out a thick document bound in heavy cream-colored linen paper. It bore a gold-embossed seal on the cover. I held it up for the court to see. "This," I said, my voice projecting to the back of the room, "is the incorporation document for Sterling and Partners. It is a private equity fund. My fund. I founded it 40 years ago. I am the sole majority shareholder." I dropped the document on the ledge in front of Derek. Derek looked at it. He saw the seal. He saw the names. He saw the valuation. "But you drive a truck." He stammered, his mind unable to reconcile the image of the gardener with the reality of the tycoon. "You live in a shack." "I live where I choose to live, Derek," I said coldly. "I drive a truck because it is reliable. Unlike you, I do not need to wear my money to know I have it." I reached into the briefcase again. "You said I was broke, Derek. You said I needed your help to manage my finances. But you didn't do your homework. If you had looked past the flannel shirt, you would have seen the shark swimming underneath." I pulled out a second document. This one was different. It was a transfer of debt agreement. It was stamped with the logo of BlackRock Capital, the predatory lending firm that held Derek's gambling debts. I walked closer to him. I was close enough to smell his fear. It smelled like cheap cologne and sweat. "Do you recognize this, Derek?" I asked, holding the paper up. He squinted. He read the header. His eyes bulged. He started to shake his head, a jerky spasms motion. "No. No, that is impossible." "It is very possible," I said. "You see, when I audited your trash, I found your demand letters. I found out you owed $4 million to BlackRock. I know they threatened to break your legs. I know they gave you until the 15th to pay up or hand over my farm. I paused, letting the information sink in. Veronica let out a small, strangled sob. She finally understood. Her husband hadn't been trying to save me. He had been trying to save himself from a death sentence. I did some calling around, I continued. It turns out I own a significant silent positions in the parent company that owns BlackRock. They were very happy to sell me your debt portfolio. I bought it this morning. I wired the $4 million from my motel room. I slapped the paper down on top of the incorporation documents. Derek flinched as if I had hit him. You do not owe the bank anymore, Derek, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried the weight of a tombstone. You do not owe the loan sharks. You owe me. I am your creditor. I own your debt. I own your house. I own your car. I own every single thing you think is yours. Derek looked at me with pure, unadulterated horror. He looked at the judge begging for intervention, but Finch just sat there, his face grim, watching justice unfold. You bought my debt, Derek whispered, his voice cracking. I leaned in. Yes, and I am calling it in, right now. I turned to the judge. Your Honor, this man is not a concerned family member. He is a debtor attempting to defraud his creditor. He filed this guardianship petition solely to seize the collateral for a loan that I now hold. This is not a family matter. This is attempted grand larceny. Thorne, the shark lawyer, looked at the documents. He looked at Derek. He closed his briefcase. I request a recess, Thorne stammered. I need to consult with my client. Sit down, Thorne, I barked, not waiting for the judge. There is no recess. There is no consultation. We are finishing this now. I turned back to Veronica. She was standing up now, her hands covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face, ruining the makeup she had applied so carefully that morning. She looked at Derek with a mixture of revulsion and disbelief. She looked at me with shame. Daddy, she cried. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know he owed money. He told me he was investing. He told me we were rich. You are not rich, Ronnie, I said, my voice softening just a fraction for her. You are broke. He spent it all. He spent your savings. He mortgaged your house to the hilt. And when that wasn't enough, he tried to sell my home to cover his mistakes. I pointed at Derek. He was going to sign my deed over to them, Ronnie. And when the money ran out again, do you think he would have stopped? He would have sold you next. Derek slumped in his chair. The arrogance was gone. The bravado was gone. He was just a small, scared man in an expensive suit that he couldn't pay for. It was just business, Gus, he mumbled, looking at the floor. It was just business. I was going to pay it back. Business, I scoffed. No, Derek. Business is what I did for 40 years. Business is honor. Business is trust. What you did, that is a crime. I looked at Judge Finch. Your Honor, I have one more document to enter into evidence. I reached into the briefcase one last time. This wasn't a financial document. It was a small USB drive. I told you I tapped his office, Derek. But I didn't just hear you talking to the doctor. I heard you talking to someone else. Someone named Crystal. Derek's head snapped up. His eyes were pleading now. No. Gus, please. Not that. Anything but that. I ignored him. I handed the drive to the bailiff. Play track 3, please. The bailiff plugged the drive into the court's computer. The speakers crackled to life. And suddenly, Derek's voice filled the room again, clear and confident, from a phone call he had made 2 days ago. Do not worry, baby, the recording played. The old man will be locked up by Friday. Once I get the power of attorney, I sell the farm, pay off the sharks, and we take the rest of the cash to Cabo. I will file for divorce from Veronica once the check clears. She is so stupid she will never see it coming. She actually thinks I am doing this for her now. The recording ended with the sound of Derek laughing. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Veronica didn't scream. She didn't faint. She just stood there, swaying slightly, looking at the man she had married, the man she had defended against her own father. Derek put his head in his hands. It was over. The silencer had spoken. The recording ended, leaving a silence in the courtroom so profound it felt heavy, like a physical weight pressing down on every single person in the gallery. The echo of Derek's laughter from the speakers seemed to hang in the air, mocking the woman standing next to him. Veronica was frozen. She was staring at the man she had loved, the man she had defended against her own father, and for the first time she was seeing a stranger. Her hands were trembling violently by her sides, and her face was a mask of absolute devastation. Derek tried to speak. He tried to summon that smooth salesman charm that had worked for him his entire life, but his throat was dry and his eyes were darting around the room, looking for an exit that didn't exist. "That is not real," he croaked, pointing a shaking finger at the speakers. "That is a deep fake. He manipulated it. He is good with computers, everyone knows that. He made it up to ruin me." I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. I simply reached into my briefcase again. The sound of the leather flap opening was the only noise in the room. I pulled out a stack of high-resolution photographs. I walked over to the jury box, even though there was no jury today, and I laid them out on the railing for the judge to see clearly. "You say the recording is fake, Derek," I said, my voice calm and cold. "But these photographs are very real." The first photo showed Derek sitting in his car in a parking lot. He was handing a thick white envelope to a man in a lab coat. "This is you yesterday afternoon," I continued. "You are in the parking lot of the Quick Care Clinic. And the man taking that envelope is Dr. Aris, the man who signed the affidavit, declaring me incompetent without ever meeting me." I laid down the second photo. It was a close-up taken with a telephoto lens. It showed the envelope open. Inside were stacks of $100 bills. "And this," I said, "is the payment. $5,000 cash." Bribing a medical professional to falsify a diagnosis is a felony, Derek. It is also a violation of federal healthcare laws. Derek looked at the photos. His knees buckled and he had to grab the edge of the defense table to keep from falling. His lawyer Thorne picked up the photos, looked at them once, and dropped them as if they were burning coals. He stepped away from Derek, creating a physical distance between himself and his client. He knew the ship was sinking, and he wasn't going down with the captain. "But I am not done," I said, turning my back on Derek and facing my daughter. "Veronica, look at me." She looked up. Her eyes were red and swollen. She looked like a child who had just found out Santa Claus was dead. "He didn't just cheat on you, Ronnie," I said, softening my voice just enough for her to hear the truth beneath the anger. "He stole from you. He stole your future." I picked up the final document from my briefcase. It was a loan application for the $4 million he owed to BlackRock Capital. I walked over to her and held it up. "Look at the signature line," I commanded. She squinted through her tears. She saw her name. Veronica Sterling Vance. It was signed in blue ink with a flourish that looked exactly like her handwriting. "Did you sign this?" I asked. "Did you authorize a $4 million loan against your own home?" She shook her head slowly. "No," she whispered. I didn't know about any loan." I turned to the judge. "Your Honor," I said, my voice ringing with the authority of the silencer. "The defendant not only committed perjury and bribery, but he has also committed bank fraud and identity theft against his own wife. He forged her signature to secure funds for illegal gambling. He used her credit, her name, and her trust to dig a hole so deep she would never climb out of it." Judge Finch had seen enough. The shock on his face had been replaced by a cold, hard fury. He was a man of the law, and his courtroom had been turned into a crime scene. He stood up, his black robe billowing around him like the wings of a crow. "Bailiff," he barked, pointing a finger at Derek. "Take Mr. Vance into custody immediately." The bailiff, a large man who had been watching the proceedings with growing disgust, moved fast. He crossed the room in 3 strides. He grabbed Derek by the arm and spun him around. Derek yelped, "Hey, watch the suit! You can't do this! I have rights! This is a civil hearing!" "It just became criminal," Judge Finch roared. "I am holding you in contempt of court for perjury. I am also ordering your immediate arrest on suspicion of fraud, forgery, and bribery. The district attorney is already on his way." The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was the sweetest sound I had heard in 20 years. Click, click. Derek struggled. He tried to pull away, but the bailiff held him fast, pushing him down onto the table. The reality of the situation finally crashed down on him. The arrogance evaporated, leaving only a terrified, pathetic coward. And then he did exactly what I knew he would do. He turned on the only person who had ever truly loved him. "Veronica," he screamed, his face pressed against the wood of the table. Tell them you signed it. Tell them you knew about the money." Veronica took a step back, her hands over her mouth. "Do not look at me like that, you stupid woman," he yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. "You wanted this. You wanted the big house. You wanted the cars. You pushed me to make more money. This is your fault. If you weren't so useless and expensive, I wouldn't have had to do this. You drained me dry." The entire courtroom gasped. It was the final betrayal. He wasn't just a thief. He was a parasite who blamed the host for bleeding. Veronica stood there, and I watched the last illusion shatter in her eyes. She looked at the man she had married, the man she had chosen over her own father, and she finally saw him clearly. She saw the greed. She saw the weakness. She saw the hate. "Get him out of here," Judge Finch ordered. The bailiff hauled Derek up by his armpits. Derek was crying now, snot running down his face, kicking his legs like a toddler having a tantrum. "Gus, please," he begged, looking at me with wild eyes. "We can make a deal. I can help you run the fund. I know the market. Do not let them take me. I am family." I looked at him. I adjusted my flannel shirt. "You are not family, Derek," I said, my voice flat. "You are a bad investment, and I am liquidating you." The bailiff dragged him toward the side door that led to the holding cells. Derek's screams echoed off the walls, blaming everyone but himself, cursing the judge, cursing me, and finally cursing Veronica, until the heavy metal door slammed shut, cutting off his voice. Silence returned to the room, but it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of before. It was the clean, sharp silence that comes after a storm. Judge Finch sat down slowly. He took a deep breath and looked at me. "Mr. Sterling," he said, his tone respectful, "the petition for guardianship is dismissed with prejudice. Your assets are unfrozen immediately. The court apologizes for the inconvenience this has caused you." I nodded. "Thank you, Harry," I said, using his first name one last time. The judge looked at the lawyer Thorne, who was frantically packing his briefcase, trying to disappear. "And Mr. Thorne," the judge added, his voice dangerous, "I will be reporting your conduct today to the Bar Association. I suggest you find a very good lawyer for yourself." I turned to look at Veronica. She was standing alone at the plaintiff's table. Her expensive purse was on the floor. Her perfect hair was messy. She looked small. She looked broken. She looked up and met my eyes. For the first time in years, she didn't look at me with condescension or pity. She looked at me with fear and shame. She realized that the old man she had tried to put away was the only person in the room who had actually been telling the truth. She took a step toward me, her hands reaching out tentatively. "Daddy," she whispered. I didn't move. I didn't open my arms. The war was over. The enemy was destroyed, but the casualties were high. I picked up my old canvas hat from the table and placed it on my head. I picked up the leather briefcase that held the secrets of my life. I turned my back on her and walked toward the exit. My boots squeaked on the floor, leaving one final trail of mud. I didn't look back. Not yet. She needed to sit in the wreckage she had helped create. She needed to feel the cold wind of reality without her father's coat to keep her warm. That was the only way she would ever learn to build her own fire. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the courthouse and stepped out into the blinding afternoon sun. The air was thick and humid, carrying the scent of asphalt and exhaust fumes, but to me it smelled like freedom. It smelled like the end of a long, dark winter. I adjusted my hat, pulling the brim down low over my eyes, not to hide but to shield myself from the glare. My old Red Wing boots felt heavy on the concrete steps, but my spirit felt lighter than it had in years. I had walked into that building as a victim, a target, a senile old man to be harvested for his assets. I was walking out as a victor. I was walking out as Augustus Sterling. I reached into my pocket and felt the keys to my truck. That old Ford was the only thing I hadn't lied about. It really was reliable. It really was mine. I started walking toward the far end of the parking lot, where I had left it parked between a sleek BMW and a Lexus. Even in the parking lot, the class divide was evident, but I knew now that the only difference between the drivers of those cars and me was that I owned the bank that financed them. "Daddy, wait." The voice was shrill, desperate, and breathless. I didn't stop walking. I knew who it was. I had been expecting it. "Daddy, please stop." I heard the rapid click, click, click of high heels running on pavement. It was a frantic rhythm, a sound of panic. I reached my truck and put my hand on the door handle. I paused. I took a deep breath. I owed her this. I owed her the finality of this moment. I turned around. Veronica was running toward me, stumbling slightly. Her expensive cream-colored suit was rumpled. Her mascara had run down her cheeks in black streaks, making her look like a tragic clown. She wasn't the composed, arrogant woman who had laughed at me in the courtroom. She wasn't the socialite who worried about mud on her marble floors. She was just a frightened woman who had just watched her entire world implode. She reached me and grabbed my arm, her grip tight and shaking. She was gasping for air, her chest heaving. "Daddy, do not leave me," she sobbed. "Please, you cannot just leave me here." I looked at her hand on my arm. Her manicured nails dug into my flannel shirt. I didn't pull away, but I didn't cover her hand with mine either. I just looked at her. "What do you want, Veronica?" I asked, my voice calm and level. "The hearing is over. You are free to go." She shook her head violently, tears flying from her face. No, I am not free. Derek, he ruined everything. The police took him, Daddy. They took him away in handcuffs. He was screaming my name. He said I signed those papers." I looked at her steadily. "You did sign them, Ronnie. Maybe you didn't read them. Maybe you trusted him blindly. But your signature is on the loan documents. Your name is on the corporate filings. Ignorance is not a defense in the eyes of the law, and it certainly isn't a defense in the eyes of the bank." She collapsed. It wasn't a figure of speech. Her legs literally gave out, and she fell to her knees right there on the dirty asphalt of the parking lot. She didn't care about her suit anymore. She didn't care who was watching. She wrapped her arms around my legs, hugging my muddy boots, burying her face against my denim jeans. "I was blind," she wailed, her voice muffled against my leg. "I was so stupid. I just wanted him to love me. I wanted the life he promised. He said we were building a future. He said you were holding us back. I believed him, Daddy. I am so sorry. Please forgive me. I was blind." I looked down at the top of her head. I remembered when she was 5 years old and she had fallen off the swing set. She had cried just like this, holding onto my leg, begging me to make the pain go away. Back then, a kiss and a Band-Aid were enough. Back then, I could fix anything. But she wasn't 5 years old anymore. She was 38, and the scrape on her knee wasn't a scrape. It was a $4 million debt and a potential indictment for fraud. "Get up, Veronica," I said firmly. "Stand up. Sterlings do not kneel in parking lots." She sniffled and slowly pulled herself up. She looked at me with wide, hopeful eyes. She thought my tone meant I was taking charge. She thought Daddy was back to fix it. "Daddy, help me," she pleaded, wiping her nose with the back of her hand, a gesture so childish it made my heart ache. "The house, the bank is going to call the loan. Derek said he leveraged it to the hilt. If I do not pay, they are going to take it. They are going to throw me on the street. I have nowhere to go. I have no money." He emptied our joint accounts. She grabbed my hand again, squeezing it. "But you have money. The judge said you are rich. He said you have millions. You bought Derek's debt right. That means you own the loan on the house. You can forgive it. You can write it off. Just sign a paper, Daddy. Please. Save my home. It is all I have left." I looked at her. I saw the desperation, but I also saw the entitlement. It was buried deep under the fear, but it was there. She still thought the solution to her problems was a check. She still thought that because I had money, her problems would disappear. She hadn't learned the lesson yet. She had only felt the sting of the whip. She hadn't learned why it was cracking. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket. I pulled out my checkbook. It was an old leather-bound book, one I rarely used. Veronica's eyes lit up. It was instantaneous. The fear receded just a fraction, replaced by a glimmer of relief. She watched hungrily as I pulled a pen from my pocket. "Thank you, Daddy," she breathed, exhaling a long, shuddering breath. "Thank you. I promise I will pay you back. I will get a job. I will do whatever you want. Just save the house." I opened the checkbook. I rested it on the hood of my truck. I wrote the date. I wrote her name on the payee line. Veronica Sterling Vance. I looked at her. "How much is the mortgage arrears?" I asked. $50,000, she said quickly. "And the immediate penalties are another 20. I nodded. I wrote out the amount. $70,000. I signed my name at the bottom. Augustus Sterling. The signature was flamboyant, powerful, the signature of a man who could buy this entire parking lot without blinking. I tore the check out of the book. The sound was crisp and satisfying. I held it up. The wind caught the edge of the paper, fluttering it like a flag of surrender. Veronica reached for it, her hand trembling, her eyes locked on the blue paper as if it were oxygen and she was drowning. "Here," I said, holding it just out of her reach. "This is what you want, isn't it? This is the easy way out. This makes the bad men go away. This keeps the lights on in the mansion. This lets you pretend for a few more months that you didn't marry a con artist." "Yes, Daddy, please," she whimpered, reaching on her tiptoes. I looked her in the eye. My expression hardened. "No, Veronica." I took the check in both hands. I watched her eyes widen in horror, and then slowly, deliberately, I tore it in half. "No," she screamed, a sound of pure anguish, lunging for the pieces. "Daddy, what are you doing?" I tore the halves into quarters, then into eighths. I let the confetti of blue paper fall from my hands. The wind caught the pieces, scattering them across the asphalt like snow. $70,000 gone in the wind. "I am not saving you, Veronica," I said, my voice dropping to a low rumble that vibrated in my chest. "I am saving your character." She stared at the pieces of paper on the ground, mouth open, shock rendering her mute. "If I give you that money," I continued, stepping closer to her, forcing her to look at me, "if I pay off your debts, if I save your house, you will never change. You will still be the child who thinks the world owes her a living. You will still be the woman who let a man convince her to betray her own father because it was convenient. You will be a parasite, Veronica, attached to a new host, and I love you too much to let you be a parasite. But I will be homeless, she cried, tears streaming down her face again. I will lose everything. Good, I said brutally. Lose it. Lose the house. It was built on lies anyway. Lose the car. Lose the country club membership. Lose the fake friends who only liked you because of your husband's credit card. Lose it all, Veronica. Hit the bottom, because the bottom is the only place solid enough to build a real foundation. I pointed a finger at her chest, right over her heart. You are going to learn what I learned. You are going to learn what it feels like to sleep in a room that smells like smoke because it is all you can afford. You are going to learn how to budget for a loaf of bread. You are going to learn the value of $1, not because I gave it to you, but because you earned it with your own sweat. She looked at me terrified. But Daddy, I can't. I do not know how. Then you will learn, I said. Just like I did. Just like your mother did. You have hands. You have a brain. You are a sterling. We are survivors. I reached into my pocket again. This time I didn't pull out money. I pulled out a small plain white business card. I handed it to her. This is the number for a lawyer, I said. Not Harrison. He is too expensive for you. This is a legal aid attorney, a good one. He specializes in divorce and fraud victims. I have paid his retainer. He will keep you out of prison, Ronnie. He will help you untangle yourself from Derek's crimes. He will make sure you do not go to jail for what your husband did. That is the only help you are getting from me. Legal defense. Not life support. She took the card, looking at it as if it were a foreign object. And the house, she whispered one last time. The house will be foreclosed, I stated flatly. I own the debt now, remember, and I am initiating foreclosure proceedings tomorrow. You have 30 days to vacate. I suggest you start packing. I suggest you sell the furniture, the jewelry, the clothes, anything you can to get a deposit for an apartment. A small apartment. One you can afford waiting tables or answering phones. She looked up at me, and for the first time I saw something other than greed or fear. I saw anger. You are cruel, she hissed. You are a cruel old man. You have millions and you are making your own daughter homeless. I smiled. It was a sad smile, but it was genuine. No, Ronnie. Cruelty would be letting you stay exactly as you are. Cruelty would be letting you remain weak. This is love. This is the hardest love I have ever had to give. But one day, maybe 10 years from now, when you are standing on your own 2 feet, paying your own bills with money you earned, you will understand. And if you don't, well, then I failed you a long time ago. I turned around and opened the door of my truck. I climbed into the cab. The seat was worn and comfortable. The engine started with a roar. I rolled down the window. Veronica was standing there, clutching the business card, the pieces of the torn check blowing around her ankles. She looked small and alone in the vast parking lot. 30 days, Ronnie, I said. Make them count. I put the truck in gear and drove away. I watched her in the rearview mirror until she was just a small speck in the distance. My heart was breaking. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn around, to go back, to wrap her in my arms and write another check. But I kept driving. I drove toward the highway, toward the water, toward the future. I had broken her heart today. I had shattered her world. But I had saved her soul. And that was a price I was willing to pay. The water of the bay was calm today, a sheet of polished glass reflecting the gray-blue of the early morning sky. The only sound was the gentle lapping of waves against the hull of my boat and the rhythmic clicking of a fishing reel. It was a 30-foot trawler, nothing fancy, nothing that shouted wealth to the world. I had named her Martha's Dream, painted in neat white letters on the stern. It was the boat we had always talked about buying, the one we were going to use to sail up the coast when we retired. She never got to step foot on the deck, but I felt her presence in the salty breeze and the warmth of the sun. I sat in the captain's chair, a fishing rod in my hand, my old canvas hat pulled low over my eyes. Sitting across from me, holding a can of cheap beer and looking happier than I had ever seen him in a robe, was Harry Finch. He wasn't Judge Finch out here. He was just Harry, the man who had remembered honor when it mattered most. "You know, Gus," Harry said, looking out at the horizon where the water met the sky. "People in the courthouse still talk about that day. They call it the Red Wedding of Probate Court. Thorne is still trying to get his license back. And Derek is enjoying the hospitality of the state penitentiary. I heard he is working in the laundry." I chuckled softly, reeling in my line a few inches. "It is honest work, Harry. For the first time in his life, Derek is actually earning his keep. It might do him some good." Harry took a sip of his beer. "And what about you, Gus? You could be on a mega yacht in the Mediterranean right now. You could be drinking champagne with models. Instead, you are here drinking lukewarm coffee with a retired judge eating a ham sandwich. Why?" I looked at the sandwich in my hand. It tasted better than any filet mignon I had ever eaten. "Because this is real, Harry," I said. "The yacht is just a floating prison of expectations. This boat, this water, this sandwich, it is real. And besides, I have work to do here." Harry nodded, his expression turning serious. "The Sterling Foundation. I saw the quarterly report. You have saved over 200 seniors from financial abuse in the last 6 months alone. That is impressive work. It is necessary work," I corrected him. "I used the dividends from the textile shares not to buy toys, but to build a fortress. I hired a team of forensic accountants, lawyers, and social workers. We find them, Harry. We find the old women whose nephews are draining their savings. We find the grandfathers whose caregivers are forging checks. We step in. We freeze the assets. We sue the predators. We give those people their dignity back." I thought about the faces of the people we had helped. The relief in their eyes when they realized they weren't crazy, that someone believed them, that they weren't going to die penniless because someone they loved had betrayed them. It was the most satisfying work of my life. I was still the silencer, but now I wasn't silencing corrupt CEOs. I was silencing the fear in the hearts of the vulnerable. We fished for another hour in comfortable silence, catching nothing but peace of mind. When we docked at the marina, the sun was high and bright. I said goodbye to Harry, promising to do it again next week. I walked to the parking lot. My truck was there waiting for me. My 1995 Ford F-150. I had spent $10,000 restoring the engine and the suspension, so it ran like a dream, but I hadn't touched the paint. I left the rust spots. I left the dents. I wanted to remember. I could have walked into a dealership and bought a Ferrari in cash. I could have bought a fleet of them. But I didn't want a Ferrari. I wanted my truck. It reminded me of where I came from, and it kept me invisible. In a world obsessed with showing off, being invisible was the ultimate luxury. I started the engine, and the old girl roared to life. I drove out of the marina and headed toward town. I took the scenic route, driving through the streets of the city that had once felt like a battleground. Now it just felt like a place. I turned onto Main Street, passing the shops and the restaurants. I slowed down as I approached a small corner cafe called the Daily Grind. It was a modest place, the kind that served breakfast all day and where the locals gathered to gossip. I pulled the truck over to the curb, but I didn't park. I just idled there for a moment, looking through the large plate glass window. It was the lunch rush. The place was packed. Moving between the tables, carrying a heavy tray loaded with plates, was a woman with her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She was wearing a brown apron that was stained with coffee and ketchup. There were dark circles under her eyes and sweat on her forehead. It was Veronica. She looked tired. She looked older than her 39 years. She moved with a frantic energy, dodging customers, wiping down tables, taking orders. I watched as a rude customer at table 4 waved his empty cup at her, snapping his fingers. The old Veronica, the woman who lived in the mansion, would have sneered at him. She would have made a scene. She would have called the manager. But this Veronica didn't. She took a deep breath. I saw her shoulders square. She walked over to the table, picked up the pot, and poured the coffee with a steady hand. She forced a smile. It wasn't a happy smile, but it was a polite one. She said something to the man, and he nodded, calming down. She walked back to the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. She looked exhausted, but she also looked solid. She wasn't floating on a cloud of debt and lies anymore. Her feet were planted firmly on the ground. She was living in a small studio apartment on the east side. She took the bus to work. She was paying off her own debts dollar by dollar. She hadn't called me for money in 6 months. She hadn't asked for a rescue. I felt a lump in my throat, but it wasn't sadness. It was pride. A fierce, burning pride. My daughter was a waitress. She was poor. She was struggling. And she was finally becoming a person. She was learning the value of $1 because she had to earn it. She was learning respect because she had to give it. She was learning that dignity isn't something you buy, it is something you build. She looked up then towards the window. Her eyes met mine through the glass. For a second, she froze. She saw her father sitting in his old truck, the man who could solve all her problems with the stroke of a pen. I didn't wave. I didn't motion for her to come out. I just smiled. A small, genuine smile that said, "I see you." She looked at me for a long heartbeat. Then she nodded. Just once. A small acknowledgement. Then she turned around, picked up another tray, and went back to work. She didn't come running. She didn't beg. She went back to work. I put the truck in gear and pulled away from the curb. I drove down the road, feeling the wind coming through the open window. The road ahead was open and clear. I thought about the $32 million sitting in my accounts. I thought about the foundation. But mostly, I thought about that woman in the apron. I realized then that the greatest inheritance I could ever leave her wasn't the money. If I had given her the millions, she would have remained a child forever. She would have remained weak. By taking everything away from her, I had given her the only thing that mattered. I had given her her life back. I had given her the chance to find out who she really was when the lights went out and the audience went home. The greatest asset I leave to my daughter is not $30 million. It is the ability to stand on her own 2 feet, without crutches, without lies, without me. That is the only wealth that cannot be stolen. That is the only legacy that lasts. And that, I decided as I drove toward the sunset, is what true love actually looks like. It does not look like a check. It looks like letting them fall so they can learn how to fly. My name is Augustus Sterling, and I am finally at peace. Sometimes the people who love us the most are the ones who refuse to save us from ourselves. We live in a world that equates love with comfort, that thinks a good parent removes every obstacle from a child's path. But true love is often uncomfortable. It requires the immense courage to stand back and watch someone struggle, knowing that the struggle is the only way they will grow. Enabling is not love, it is fear. Breaking the cycle of dependency is the hardest thing you will ever do, but it is the only way to build a legacy of strength rather than entitlement. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever had to make a hard choice to help someone grow, please hit that like button. It helps share this message with others who might need to hear it. Subscribe to the channel for more stories about justice, resilience, and the hard truths of life. And tell me in the comments, have you ever practiced tough love or been on the receiving end of it? How did it change you? I read every comment, and I would